That works. Praise the Omnisire. Woo. Hello, everybody. How are we doing? A little bit pizza tired, right? Great. So the flesh is apparently weak. I'm Martin. I'm from the University College of London. And now from leadership, we're going into design. And you're going to ask yourselves like, oh, if you read your abstracts, like, why is a computer scientist talking about design right now? Well, welcome to this wonderful space of human-computer interaction where we combine design research, computer science research, and psychology. Please don't rhyme that much. I'm working with clinicians. They love me so far. So I'm trying to please all the machine and psychology ghosts in the room. So a little bit about UCL. This is our wonderful campus. So like blah, 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 wonderful building. The funny part is, why I'm struggling with money is, there's my office up there. And we have here the Warhammer tour. Basically, you have 5 minutes that you are in the official Tottenham Court Road Warhammer store. And if you want to have it, if you want to save a discount, you go 5 minutes further, and then you're down here to the Element Game store, where you get 20% discount. So, and my problem is my tube station is down there. So I'm always like, okay, should I follow the path of order and save money, or nah? So, as you probably imagine, I'm a passionate Warhammer gamer. Started a couple of years ago. The story behind it is I finished my PhD in computer science, where I looked into how we can assess mental health needs of users through in-game behavior. And so looked into, okay, they're moving around around strangers in the game, and does this tell us more about their social skills and also their needs? And I finished my PhD, yaha! And then my friends in Germany were like, well done, this is good. Good PhD. Here's the combat box from AdMech. This is better. And since then, I got addicted to plastic. So this is also a little bit experiment for me today, because I'm trying to bring in Warhammer more into my teaching. So yay! And as a first step, like this litany of interactions, like I think we need to step a little bit back. We're doing time traveling, which is impossible, which we learned today in the morning, but we're trying to do it today anyway. So let's go back into the year 2025. What is actually this weird heretical thing you're calling human-computer interaction? And one of the major goals, I'm trying to keep it as short as possible so that we have enough airtime to talk about the actually cool stuff. So if you try to condense it, what do we have to do as good human-computer interaction designers and interaction designers, which is like this overlap between human-computer interaction researchers who are really looking into human tries to do something with computer. Computer dumb, user also dumb. How can you make these two talk to each other? And how can they use together technologies? I'm trying to condense it. And I'm bringing in from one from the teaching books, always this wonderful quote. So as interaction designers, which is more like the industry people who are actually applying knowledge from human-computer interaction research into our daily life, what they have to do is basically they have to develop interactive products that are easy, effective, and pleasurable to use. So not Slanesh style pleasurable, but like actually joyful to use. Like you have this kind of user experience focus. Now, in 2025, you probably experienced these wonderful machines. So you're trying to pay with your card or with your phone, and then you're trying to put it on, and then suddenly, burp, there's this kind of weird paper thing there. And my job, basically, in a nutshell, is to prevent that users have to put these stickers on. Another thing about pleasurable design is, like I asked some of my students to design audio sliders, like to control the volume. And I asked them to make it most pleasurable. Now, basically, you might think like, haha, I just have to use the slider here. And they were like, nah, we can make it even more playful. Quick sense check. Who would use this?
Like 5 minutes max. Yeah.
Okay. Heresy. Go to you. The interesting point about this is basically like what we see here is this kind of, on one side, we're trying to like, tee it's fun for 5 minutes, as you said rightly, and then it's like after 5 minutes you're gonna hate the designer. You would try to fry me alive. And that's basically what good user experience designers and human computer interaction researchers are doing. It's like we're trying to help designers to develop products which are easy to use, pleasurable to interact with, and also efficient. And there's like, I'm condensing here right now, there's like some guidelines around that, which is trying to help you as a designer, as a future designer, to keep these systems in a usable and pleasurable state. And then one of these ones is Don Norman. So what are the key aspects of good everyday design? It's like on one side, we want to say it's like discoverability. It's like we want to say, okay, it's easy to understand what's happening here. It's like, for example, if you have a system like these kinds of interaction devices, so like it's very interesting. It's like, how do you teach in the old times, like we have an evolution here, how do you teach a person who never used a phone how to unlock it right now? Like, it's not really clear, right? It's like at some point, if you wait long enough in the elder times, like this thing started to jump. It's like the unlock button jumps. And then it's like, oh, I have to swipe up. And that's basically like these kinds of principles of feature of discoverability. So like, how can I help the user to discover what they can do with my system? It's like, for example, also, of course, and you can ask yourself also with your systems, how easy must a system show, or so like how easy must things be discoverable? So for example, if you say like, oh, let's say the destroy all data button, should that be easy discoverable? For some data, yes. Let's phrase it like that. Yeah. Some other data don't. So as you can see, it's like always a little bit like context matters. The second point, I'm trying to move on, feedbacks, like we want to, of course, always have this communication of the actions, like what's actually happening in your system. So wonderful example, Windows. Who uses it these days? Right. Do you like it? Do you like Windows updates? Hey, so why don't you like it? Because it's awful at communicating what's going on. So for example, when there's like, okay, you're trying to shut down the system and suddenly like, oh, sorry, we have to do an update. It's like, and you not expected it. You had to run to the tube, you have whatever. It's like, and Windows is like, you need to be a little bit more zen today. You need to run an update. And that's basically like this kind of feedback. It's like, that's like a very prominent example, but it's like we have this also in small steps in our daily interactions with systems. Like if you say it's like you upload a document to a browser and you don't see like the update icon, it's just silent, the system, and suddenly like, boom, it's done. Like, and you're like, what? It's like these kinds of things where you're like, okay, is this actually happening? Is it doing it? And so these kinds of feedbacks, we must be aware that we are implementing them. Then, of course, like conceptual models, maybe that's like a third important point. We're saying like, okay, we all have models how our system works. For a lot of us, it's black boxes. So does anybody know how ChatGPT works? There we go. You know maybe the theory, but it's like the actual implementation, you're like, okay, some things. Like for a lot of systems, and right now it's like you're an expert in the system, I assume. But then basically it's like, let's say it's like you have a user who has never used AI before. How do they treat the systems? Like it's like bonkers for them. It's like, oh, there's this magic box and I'm getting cool informations out of it. And then of course, like you have the other ones, which I'm cutting right now, but like affordances, signifiers and mapping, where basically it's like this really a real fun example, mapping, where it comes to oven design. It's like if you have a stove and you have 4 buttons to signalize which button, which stove heats up. And that's like a whole science around it. It's like, how do you have to lay out the buttons to heat up the whole thing? Like, is it like the rectangulars, like each button close to the stove is heating up, or do you have it just like for design space, like as a ray at the bottom? So that's like one important thing which we have to focus on for the next parts when ArtMake is coming entering the stage. These kinds of core concepts which we use then to analyze, okay, how are they basically, like how is in the 41 millennia the technology evolved? I want to zoom in for a moment into one aspect of Norman's key guidelines is the mental models. There's this kind of the ELIZA effect, where we're basically saying like, oh, the system is thinking, or the system has emotions, it maybe hates me. These kinds of elements have been described from a very, very long time ago. Joseph Weizenbaum. It's like ELIZA. Do you know who ELIZA was? Everybody? Okay. ELIZA was basically one of the first chatbots, and then basically it's like he proposed that as a mental health intervention, and then he what then came out was basically that users started to attribute humanoid and anthropomorphic characteristics to ELIZA, although it was just basically a decision tree. So like there's like, oh, okay, if this is happening, then you should write this. If this is happening, you should write this. And then basically it's like it's very simple logic. But then the users started to say, oh, it's thinking, it's feeling, it's believing. And listen to yourself, to your little machine ghost in your machine spirit in yourself. Aren't you also doing this from time to time, especially with printers? Have you tried to print lately? The mental models of printers are, for me, basically, these are assholes. But yeah, basically, it's like we're trying to because we don't have a full understanding of the technology or how the system works, and then basically trying to fill the gap with our mental models. And then the last step, which we have to think about from the user experience perspective, is why not just make it simple? I'm bringing in another game here. That's a wonderful story. World of Warcraft. Yes. Exactly. So the interesting thing here is the story. It's like I worked for a company, a games company, and we were thinking about like how do you do the user interface. And then we asked basically pro gamers and casual gamers. And pro gamers, this. Then we were like, okay, testing. Then the casual gamers came in, and then they're like, where's my mom? I want to go home. This is scary. And so basically what we're talking about here is basically like you need to think about what are the user capabilities and their skills. So if you have the expert players, they want to have all the information at hand right now. They don't care about the visuals, for example. Like another example, we were working on StarCraft 2, and then basically it's like looked at as like a field study where we asked pro gamers of StarCraft 2 play. Invited them, and then basically every player of them first came into the lab and reduced the graphics. It's like we had a high-performing PC, options menu, everything onto low. Because they were like, okay, maximum performance, and they don't care about the visuals, they just care about the performance. And then it's like, okay, the visuals might be distracting them, blah, blah, blah. So, and that's basically what when you start to design systems, you need to start to be aware of like what is the user capable of, what are their mental models, and also the context. So long story short, human-computer interaction is like investigating in these three areas where you first look into what is our user capable of, what are their needs, what is their understanding. Then we need to look into the context, like where's the system used, how is it used? Like for example, let's say emergency situations. If you think about let's go into an emergency room, and this is the user interface you have to deal with. Good luck with that. So that's basically like you need to have a quick solution. Therefore, the interface the context needs to be aware of. And then, of course, then this kind of interaction space and this interface itself, like how can we do it better? Now, everybody ready? Knows what human-computer interaction is? All right, let's set sail to the Code Mechanicum. Whee! So, I want to use a very good example from the stories, and it's from the beginning of the Code Mechanicum. And we're starting with the crisis, the sacred ignorance. And it's like we have the crisis where we have like humanity and mankind was basically at the tip of the height of their technological advancements, like everything perfect, yada yada yada. But then AI broke everything. We have to like then went into the chaos space. And then, of course, these SDCs were lost. Knowledge became fragmental and dangerous. Like we mankind lost all the knowledge, and then basically it's like this kind of quest for knowledge evolved, and then basically it's like building on this kind of ignorance, or like this kind of search, the Adeptus Mechanicus or the Mechanicus cult evolved. And now there were two responses, or like two responses to the lost knowledge. On one side, of course, we have the Orthodox Mechanicus, where we have like four ideas: mystification of as safety, the ritual as preservation, the hierarchy as control, and innovation as heresy. Like on one side, we have basically this kind of, we heard it in the morning, where we have like the Iron Striders. It's like, don't touch it, it still runs. So like, don't question it, just keep it running. It's like, okay, I'm keeping it safe. The second, ritual as preservation, the cargo pool computing and the maintain of the functions. Again, it's like, you don't start to question, it was like the user doesn't start to question systems. It's just like, it has worked, we don't change it. And the third one, the hierarchy of control, that limited dangerous knowledge to proven initiates. So basically, if you think about that, it's like all the stories, and if you look into the stories of ATMEC, I'm cutting short here, are focusing on this kind of idea around, okay, the tech priests are going out, they're collecting knowledge, but they're not really sharing it. They're only sharing under pressure. It's like you never have these really, like, oh, okay, here, like they don't have like a academic conference. They're very secretive around these kinds of what they're collecting. And it's an interesting point leading into the last one, where innovation becomes heresy. Where we're looking into, okay, experiments, exploring and questioning ideas becomes heretic. Like you're not allowed to say, okay, maybe we should do it like this, like this. No. Now, not directly in response to the AI crisis, but like basically later on after the heresy, we have also the involvement of the dark mechanic. The dark mechanicum is actually quite the opposite to what the orthodox mechanicum is. So where basically rather than safety, mystification is safety, they're seeing it as a power module. Oops, sorry. Seeing it as a power, and then basically rituals as a corruption, hierarchy as rebellion, and innovation as salvation. So in short, basically, we have this spectrum, like the dark mechanicum, where freedom and exploration is dominated, versus the orthodox mechanicum, where we basically have like this very traditional look on technologies, like preserve technology as it is. Let's zoom out for a moment. Do we really think that the orthodox mechanicum is only a story? Not really. Mystification as safety, cloud storage. So you go into a Dropbox or you go on OneDrive and Microsoft is telling you, yeah, your data is safe with us. It's like it's mystified, this kind of where your data is stored. It's like telling you myths around where data and these kinds of things are stored. Like technology becomes a myth. The second point, ritual as preservation. Two-factor authentication. Who likes it? Do you really enjoy it? Like, yeah, cool, here another one, and then here another one, and then I have to send whatever. It's like, it's just this ritual to try to keep you safe, but like, is it actually working? How? But basically, it's like, if I want to breach, there are multiple ways on other attack points. Like, I don't need to have this kind of ritual of two-factor authentication in place. I can just basically directly go to the source. So this is just like these rituals around safety. And so like you can play around with that. It's like start to think about these kinds of ideas around you. Hierarchy as control. So this is a very interesting example. I think Mac users may have more suffering in there than the Windows users. So like in was like developers, I think it's quite common. Like the reintroduction of the console. You know, it's like this mysterious black window where you have to type in stuff and then it's super scary and spooky. That's like the console. And that's something which a lot of more advanced or experienced engineers are preferring, apparently, in comparison to younger engineers who are more like in the visual and GUI-based interfaces. But this is basically where I can, as a designer, how I want to run or build an environment for engineers to build technology. I can decide, like, how do I have to approach this? Like, how do I expose users to tools and try to guide them towards the learning of these kinds of more advanced tools? And then, of course, innovation as heresy. This is something which is quite interesting always when it comes to updating systems. Like, where basically all these kinds of technologies and apps like always have to be approved first. You have to go run through safety protocols, and especially very interesting. This is again in the Mac space or in the Apple space. So if you try to publish an app on the App Store for iOS, you have to run through multiple hoops to get approved by Apple in order to get your application uploaded and published. Like, how long does it take? And so like you can scale it up. So for example, also in the medical space, how long does it take to get a technology approved through all the hoops you have to jump? All right. So last but not least, I'm trying to get through the actual core of the dissertation of the project. So we had a heuristic evaluation of the Adaptus Mechanicus technology. What did we do? So we used the norm and key aspects, which I showed you before, and went through the technologies. So like we looked into the models, we looked into the books, I skimmed them, I didn't read all of them, so please don't burn me. I looked into the games, we looked into the art books, and basically looked into technologies of the ADMEC. So like, what did we include on one? Like we had like these kinds of static interfaces, like consoles, etc. Then also machines, which are working on their own. Then, of course, more and more users are getting duct taped on the system. And then when the user is basically on their own and then using the system. And there are like four core insights which we found. The first one, essential functions get hidden in hierarchical systems. Sacred symbols replaces clear indications. So as you can see here, this is an example of the game Mechanicus. And so it looks in the first space quite interesting, it's quite easy to understand. But what is happening there is like you have multiple input ways. Like on one side you have here the keyboard, then you have there multiple buttons here, more cables, and then basically a weird screens. Like you have these kinds of very archaic system designs where basically it's like here and against like multiple keyboards, trying to say, okay, yeah, you can input this device, but you have to understand it first. If you're only allowed to understand it if you are in the hierarchy high enough. And then basically it's like these kinds of questions we have it also, of course, in our daily life. If you go back, it's like your knowledge is like basically it's like you get locked out of systems if you're not understanding the inputs or the system designs. And bad design is basically going more and more into this direction, where it's becoming more and more difficult to actually understand how to connect with the system, to interact with the system. So these kinds of questions are quite visible these days as well. The second space, it's like what we see is like systems in the 40K millennium don't explain responses, and the machine spirit is just mysteriously working. So again, I think we have tomorrow in the evening another talk about what is the machine spirit. But here basically like this idea around like nobody is actually explaining where does it come from, how does it work, what are the outputs. And then the same is basically also when ADMEC, for example, communicates with each other, like all the languages they have, like they have binary, the code language, these kinds of non-serial communications, etc., etc. Basically, these kinds of, there's not a real clear and easy understandable way to communicate between the systems and between the users. Last point, and another point which we identified was ritual over logic. The interfaces are implemented to induce an emotion rather than solving a problem. So if you think about, you're standing in front of an imperial machine and you have to use it. You never interacted with it before, but it's like it is very designed in this kind of scary way. Like you have a lot of different screens, you have a lot of different input devices, you have a lot of different, like it's very hard to understand. Like in the millennial, we forgot how to do visual graphical user interfaces. Like, you know, what you have right now in modern systems, like all the GUIs, graphical user interfaces, they're all gone. Like it's just basically, again, we're going back to the console. It's like just two colors, very simple systems. So again, rather than saying, okay, how can we solve this problem? And then again, it's like innovation is heresy. These kind of things, like we're going back to very simplistic ways to visualize and to interact with the system. Coming to the last point, and then of course, modification forbidden and constraints prevent learning. The last point here is basically which is quite interesting. It's like going into the dark mechanicum direction, where we have this kind of, are you actually allowed to modify the system? Not really. You are allowed to modify yourself, but then basically you never hear this kind of, okay, I'm enhancing the technology, I'm investigating and researching new ways. Adeptus Mechanicus, at least in the codex and in most of the stories, are mostly depicted as explorators and archives. It's like they're not really saying, okay, we're conducting here this research, we're trying to modify and enhancing the technology, they're just using it. And then you have also all the stories where they basically like all the dead people get scouted for old augmentations, they get ripped out, the augmentations then get reused on themselves. It's like they're not really building new ways of augmentations, and you see this always in the depictions of them. It's just basically recycling them. You're asking questions right now?
Oh, yes.
Right. I hope I have enough space. The last and the interesting point is for me, when it comes basically to human-computer interaction, what's happening in the Adeptus Mechanicus is then basically they get rid of the human. In the last, in the biggest challenge was like the last step, if they have to design an interface, they say, we don't care about users. The users have to serve the machine, which is perfectly embedded, of course, in the machine cult, where they're basically saying the human stands beneath. They still have a role in there as a resource, but more like as a support, as a resource, rather than actually the user. So what we have in human-computer interaction is more this kind of on a similar level, and in the millennial, in the 41 millennial, it's going down. That basically the user becomes just a cog in the machine, and so like basically these kinds of approaches. A wonderful, one of my favorite models, and we talked about this today in the morning, of course, is the Iron Strider. When you look into that, so you have two users in that system. One is sitting on it, the other one is the system. So you could argue that this is like the people who conceive there's a user. So full creature. I don't know, it's like this is basically social media for me right now. One is earning a lot of money and it's like fighting the battle, and the other one's basically just consuming it silently in the system. So I'm wrapping up. What can we, as designers from 2025, learn through the user experience design of the 41 millennial? So design for the user evolution. Interfaces should also help people to become more capable and not just trying to lock them into one knowledge level. So you want to help people to learn your system, to master your system. So how can you do that? You can try to enhance, like suggest features, to develop also your tutorials, etc. Embrace productivity friction. Some complexity is empowering, not problematic. So sometimes what user experience designers are doing is basically like wiping away all design friction in the sense of, okay, it has to be smoothless. So like, for example, what's happening right now is this kind of discussions around how do we consume information? Are we just asking through a prompt, getting everything slopped out? Or do we have to search for our own and basically trying to refine papers, read papers, yada, 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 yada. And then, of course, make algorithms accountable. This question is like, okay, how can we help users to understand the algorithms? How can we bring the user into the loop rather than becoming a resource in it? And then, tying back to our friends at the Dark Mechanicum, of course, be aware of the warp's voices in your technology design. So always think about the user-centered design process, where you ask yourself, what is the user's problem? Why should we care? And how can we solve that? That's it. Thank you very much.